I want to introduce into the conversation. We have our good friend, Jim Robbins, who is the Senior Fellow for National Security Affairs at the American Foreign Policy Council and host of the Conservative Connection on All Fired Up Media's network. And Jim, it's great to have you with us here on The Final Say.
Hey, thanks for asking me.
It's amazing, Jim. I'm telling you, you're no different from John and I. You spend your entire life buried in newspapers and in your computer and books and, reading about all the different things going on in our world. And it seems to me that things are getting much worse on a day-by-day basis in the Middle East, in North Africa, and you want to throw in Asia as well. And they're certainly not going to be improving anytime soon.
Yeah, this is why I didn't understand all of the praise for Hillary Clinton recently, and by implication the Obama administration, talking about America's foreign policy. Because when you look around the world, it's really hard to isolate where the bright spots are. It seems like every region of the world, something bad is going on, something injurious to U.S. interests, and the U.S. has no response to it whatsoever.
No, that's right, and I fear that it's going to get even worse because I don't think John Kerry's up to the task, frankly, for Secretary of State. I'm extremely concerned if Chuck Hagel is appointed to defense, and the other fellow,
John Brennan.
Yeah, John Brennan. Thank you. CIA. It's almost like they're purposely trying to put people with the "Watch America Fall" mentality in place when this is the time where we need John Wayne, we need Patton, we need Eisenhower, we need MacArthur. We don't need guys who are the exact opposite.
Yeah, these are three really bad choices, and it says a lot to set the tenor, the tone for Mr. Obama's second term, to choose three people who, Mr. Kerry, I think probably won't do any worse than Mrs. Clinton. I don't think Mrs. Clinton did a great job to begin with. So I think he'll bring, a certain attitude and a sense of entitlement and a haircut to the meetings. But I don't think he'll get more done than she did, and she didn't do much of anything. And then Mr. Hagel,
yeah. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say Mr. Hagel is someone who is going to oversee the managed crash landing of our defense capability. And then Mr. Brennan, he's an interesting character. I really have to wonder which country he's representing. Given his views on the Middle East and so forth, I really wonder, is America really what he's representing or what?
Well, so let's be candid. Isn't that the biggest problem with Jimmy Carter? The fact that he's making his money. On the surface, he's doing some caring work with helping to provide housing through Habitat for Humanity, but in the back door, isn't he really on the payroll of the Islamist countries that love us so much, that are allies on paper only? You can argue.
Well, he certainly seems to derive a lot of his livelihood from promoting those causes. As a private citizen, of course, he has every right to do that. But nobody should be confused about that matter. Particularly when you look at who's paying him and where he's getting speaking engagements and what his public policy views are. I think that if we wanted to go back to a Carter foreign policy, he was a one-termer for a reason, because he screwed up so badly, particularly in foreign policy. Mr. Obama's failures have been pretty bad too. How he got reelected is beyond me.
Well, clearly he was a lot more charismatic. But you brought up a good point with Hillary. I don't think, unlike the current president, I don't think that Hillary had doesn't have. I felt she always had our best interests at heart. I think she's completely backwards in the approach that she took. But as you pointed out clearly, we're in almost every country we're worse off and not better off since she was there. And whenever I watch, there's a movie that's been playing over and over again on the women's channel. I forget what you call that network, but How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. And to me, that sort of sums up Hillary's foreign policy efforts and the Obama experience, which is really something along the lines of how to lose our country in 10 years.
I'd say so.
Our chat
maybe
room
less, maybe fewer.
Yeah, it's a Lifetime channel. So the Lifetime Movie Network. So apparently the women in our audience, they know these things. Yeah, how to lose a country in 10 years or less.
Yeah, I want to draw a line here. I'm looking at an article, and it's discussing the measure of a superpower being a two major regional contingency military for the 21st century, and of course this article is discussing how we're moving away from that. And you know, we see this administration now speaking of the threat of the cybersecurity and hacking coming from China and the Chinese military being involved there. So to me, the threat of China there, the threat of North Korea with their advancing program is one front, and this administration seems to think that the other front no longer exists because we pulled out of Iraq and are pulling out of Afghanistan. So they're blind to what's really occurring in the world, and it is, frankly, just absolutely frightening that, you know, now they're talking about sequester as a problem. I want to know, where do you really feel on the issue? Because are you saying this because it's what makes political sense for you today, while you're, by the way, managing the decline in the military? What does this administration really believe and stand behind?
I don't think anyone really knows what they believe and stand behind, unless it's what you just said, managing the decline of American power. And if they truly believe in that and stand behind it, then obviously that's not a good thing. Mr. Obama has said that on the record, not lately, but he did some years ago, talk about how it's a good thing for America to not be the leading economic and military power in the world because it'll force us to compete better, some nonsense like this. But in my worldview, it's generally best if America is number one, and not just at the conventional level, but also the nuclear level. I mean, here's another area of concern, not a region, but a theme. And we have a president in power who thinks it's a good idea to denuclearize our country and to go down to what he calls global zero. But it's not global. We're doing it unilaterally. We're heading towards no nuclear weapons just on our own, while Russia's building up, China's building up, Pakistan is building up, Iran is pursuing a nuclear weapon, North Korea just tested a nuclear weapon, maybe for the Iranians, we don't know. And yet, sort of a captive of ideology, the president blindly goes along the way saying, oh, yes, a world with no nuclear weapons will be much safer. Well, if that's the case, why aren't all these other countries following his lead? And it's because they know that the more we denuclearize, then the more valuable nuclear weapons are to the rest of these rogue states and potential peer competitors.
I'm so glad that you mentioned the denuclearization, because this administration is stuck in an ideology, failing to, again, observe what is occurring in this world. And I want to bring up the START Treaty, because that was, to me, the beginning of the end. When you sign a treaty where you're reducing your arms levels, allowing the nation that you spent decades confronting and then ultimately defeating because they basically ran out of money and couldn't compete any longer, to build new weapons, to build their stockpile up to the equivalent number. And when you look at that and you realize that the newer weapons that Russia will add are going to be new technology, new weapons. We have older weapons that we're going to reduce in numbers. So we don't even have the same real technology as far as nuclear arms. And then you add into the equation what China's done, what North Korea is working on, what Iran will eventually have, and other countries, Pakistan and India. Throw them into the equation too. They're not a threat at the moment, but what happens if Pakistan falls like we see Syria falling right now?
Yeah, it's really important and the START Treaty is a great example of what I'm talking about, because it's the only major international agreement that the Obama administration could conclude in its first term, and it was an extremely bad one for a lot of reasons. The reasons we've already mentioned, just the terms of the treaty. But it also betrays this kind of backward-looking mindset. It was funny during the campaign that they accused Mitt Romney of being captive of the Cold War. When they think that nuclear arms reduction can take place in a bilateral framework with just us and Russia, without including China. We don't even know how many nuclear weapons China has because they've never talked about it. We've never had a treaty with them or any negotiations whatsoever. And so we conclude this agreement. Number one, it's just with Russia, so China's out of the equation. For all we know, China is the world's largest nuclear power right now. We have no way of knowing. And number two, as you said, it commits us to building down our nuclear weapons while Russia is modernizing and increasing their nuclear weapons force. So how in the world is that treaty a good deal for us? I don't understand it.
Well, I think the answer is simple. It's not a good deal for us, and you're right. You know, as the same as we were talking about all the praising for Hillary, the reality is we haven't had any excellent bilateral trade agreements. We are, in most cases, we're at greater risk militarily. You notice during the president's inaugural address, he didn't exactly speak to the success of taking down Gaddafi. Why? Because all he did was leave us horribly exposed and make it easier for weapons transfers and make it easier for places like Al-Qaeda to get a stronger foothold in Africa. And let's talk about Al-Qaeda for a moment. Al-Qaeda has become significantly stronger. It's a headless organization by design. And you know, all of a sudden now we're not just talking about Al-Qaeda being in Afghanistan. We still have troops there, but meanwhile, you know, we're basically losing the whack-a-mole game. We've got Al-Qaeda now all over the Middle East. We have Al-Qaeda, you know, doing whatever they can to undermine Jordan. We have them all over Africa. We have them in some of the key Pacific Island nations. I mean, this is an enormous nightmare. And at the same time, we're reducing our ability to project power. And this, I think, is a very important point. It's not just our ability to project power in a big way, but there's always a game, there's always a leadership game. When people know you're the tough guy, the strongest guy on the block, people are going to tend to line up behind you because they feel it's in their best interest. When you're no longer the strong, the big guy on the block, even the little guys suddenly start to not fear you because they realize that you're not going to want to get in. And Brett, you brought this up about we no longer have the ability to fight two major wars. I mean, that long-standing doctrine is what kept America strong. So now what that means is, you know, the old, you know, I got your back. We don't have our own back. Let me restate that. We can't even have our own back because people know if we're tied up in a struggle in Afghanistan, you know, in the Middle East or elsewhere, that means you can start picking at America's bones because we're not going to have the capability of defending ourselves in a significant way elsewhere. That's a huge mistake.
Oh, it's absolutely true. In fact, something that, if I can quote Osama bin Laden, you know, the late not so great bin Laden, but he did say one thing that was true, which was that if people see a strong horse and a weak horse, they're going to go for the strong horse. Now, he thought he was a strong horse. He was wrong about that. But it's absolutely true that if you project power, confidence, a sense of capability, and so forth, that's going to deter and dissuade a lot of things that you just wouldn't have to deal with because people look at it and say, I'm not going to take that guy on. But it becomes this exponential factor once you start to weaken, once blood is drawn, you know, for example, killing our ambassador and getting away with it in Libya, things like this. And so the enemy starts to think, hey, you know, we can take these guys. They're too busy. They're preoccupied with their things. They have weak leaders. They have diminished resources. They have bad priorities. They lack a strategy. And all of these things are true. So as this goes on, not just the non-state actors like Al-Qaeda and also the non-violent Islamic threat, you know, for now non-violent, like the Muslim Brotherhood and people like that who are advancing those interests through political means, which our White House is okay with for some unknown reason, but also state actors like North Korea, like China, like Russia. They're going to try to find ways to pursue their interests at our expense, and the weaker we get, the more we're going to see that, and at some point it'll reach a critical mass where things will just be out of control and we won't know what to do about it.
Well, let's be clear too. We have made it an absolute. There's two things that this president has made very clear and announced to the world by his every actions. One is that for all that they claim to be, you know, the party of the people, they've really not supported the people, just like they completely ignored the Green Revolution, just like they're completely ignoring the crisis of Copt Christians who would rather darn near freeze to death, trying to, leave Egypt and go to other countries that might take them in than they will to stay in their own homes that were bought and paid for with their own sweat over the years. That's one. And the second thing is they've served notice that you could wait us out, that we don't have the willpower, the staying power, and we are easily distracted, and that all you have to do is wait us out, and we will basically hand you the keys to our to our domain.
That's absolutely right, and these days it's not even a matter of waiting us out, because now the bad guys can start to take the initiative, as we saw in Libya, as we've seen in Mali, as we're seeing in Egypt, and we're seeing in Syria, and maybe we'll be seeing in friendly countries like Jordan and Qatar and Bahrain and Saudi. It can get a lot worse, and I think that it will.
No, that's absolutely right. Jim, as we're letting you go, I just want to leave you with these two thoughts. We've seen the book and heard the idea of a Manchurian candidate, and I say this, is it possible we have a Manchurian candidate that's, we're not sure who he's behind. Is he working for the Islamists, or is he working for the communists, or is he working for both? And the other thing is that, it's one thing to lack political will, but when we're driving this nation on a course where we won't even have the physical will, then the political will no longer even matter.
Well, you're right. If we keep going down the road we're going, particularly with weakening economic power and weakening military power, it won't matter if we have a good guy in office or not. It's going to take years to rebuild all the damage that's being done right now.
Great. Jim Robbins, Conservative Connection, thank you for joining us this week. We will see you again next week.
Okay, thank you.